Hello, and welcome to There Can Be Only One. Every once in a while, two entries to the same IP end up with the exact same name. In this show, they go head to head so we can determine which deserves to keep the title. For today's matchup, it's Prey vs. Prey. Let's see which one comes out on top, as there can be only one Prey. Prey's early development started back in 1995, but it had trouble getting off the ground for the first year or two. In 1997, under new direction, Prey was revealed as the first game in the Talon-Brave saga. An E3 trailer in 1998 showed off its technology, including a boast about how it has
the most realistic lighting you've ever seen.
Yep. I also found this interview where the lead designer talked about how Prey required a graphics card, as in a graphics card, so that the CPU could work on just game logic and not have to pull double duty. Different times. Anyway, the real highlight of the game was the non-Euclidean portal technology, but that proved to be too challenging to work out, so the project quietly died in 1999. Then, in 2001, the project was completely restarted, developed by Human Head Studios and published by 2K Games. Prey was finally released in 2006, and it included an homage to the original devs in the credits. 3 years later, in 2009, ZeniMax purchased the IP from 3D Realms. ZeniMax had also acquired id Software earlier that year, who were one of 3D Realms' biggest competitors. Still being developed by Human Head Studios, Prey 2 was planned to be an open-world game where you play as a bounty hunter, and what you're seeing now is gameplay footage from its official announcement in 2011. Unfortunately, though, history repeated, and that project also quietly died shortly after its announcement, and ZeniMax finally officially cancelled it in 2014. Then, in 2016, ZeniMax suddenly announced Prey, developed by Arcane Studios, hot off the heels of their wildly successful game Dishonored and its sequel. Despite having no narrative continuity and almost no gameplay elements in common with Prey 2006, Prey 2017 legally belongs to the same IP, and that's how we ended up with two Preys. Now, before I get into either game, I'll go ahead and warn you. These games have some pretty graphic violence, and if you're not into that, don't watch this video. Additionally, I'm going to be dishing out minor spoilers for both games. For Prey 2006, which doesn't have a lot going on narratively, I'm going to reveal almost the entire thing. For Prey 2017, it's a little more complicated, which I'll get to later, but the bottom line is that I consider what I'll reveal to be minor. With all that out the way, let's dive right in and see what the Preys have in store for us. Holy shit, it's a working mirror! I should warn you that if you're prone to motion sickness in video games, you might not want to watch this one in full screen. The head bobbing in this intro animation is already pretty bad, and trust me, it gets worse. Oh my god, it really is a working mirror. And a working sink! Look at how the water collects and drains. You can flush the urinal, and make a mess with the hand soap! This game rules. Yeah, so this is easily the most interactive bathroom I've ever seen. In a video game. You can also kick stuff around, always happy to see boxes with physics. Kinda weird that only one of the mirrors works though, right? Well anyway, let's get on with the game. The interactivity isn't just limited to the bathroom. You can also play the arcade gambling machines and a Pac-Man ripoff called Rune Man, named after Human Head's previous game. You can also flick through the TV channels and change what's playing on the jukebox. I don't recognize any of these. And of course, you can slap the payphone out of its receiver. Anyway, these two goons are being racist and start harassing Jin, so you decide enough is enough and use your wrench to beat the snot out of them.
Bobby, are you crazy? You could have killed them!
Maybe a little more than just the snot. Suddenly, aliens! Ooh, a bunch more working mirrors. Impressive. So the situation looks pretty dire, but luckily someone sabotages the line and sets me free. Unfortunately, Jin and Anisi, my grandfather, are still screwed. A father figure trapped by aliens in a pod on a line. Where have I seen that before? Oh look, someone else made it out.
Hey man, are you okay? Shit, guess not.
This way.
He tells me to go this way, but it's just a dead end. Wait a second. Holy shit. Holy shit! Yeah, the portal technology that was shown off in the original 1998 Prey trailer is still here, and they look better than ever. That was completely seamless. I should note too that this predates Valve's incredible puzzle game Portal, only by a little over a year, but that's still well before Portal's reveal. And they're messing with the gravity too? Well, I guess that makes sense. If we're in space, the gravity would all have to be artificial anyway. When we meet back up with Anisi, he's in a bit of a tough spot.
I shall await you in the land of the ancients.
Oh my god, no!
Yeah, I was not kidding when I mentioned graphic violence. Like I said, this game is not for everyone.
Stop the machine for now.
12 seconds later.
Oh god, what did I just do?
Oh, oops. Shit. My bad. Well, not my problem. Now we finally get a gun. More on that later. I like how the alien ship, and the gun for that matter, have this combination of advanced technology and organic matter. I just generally think that's a cool aesthetic, but especially for the ship, it feels like the whole thing is one big organism. Oh look, another survivor.
How did you escape? Yeah, okay. Calm down.
Well, this is getting us nowhere. Let's keep going. Yeah, this is pretty cool. Awesome. No way! What's that? A magic potato? It reminds me a bit of this other magic potato from Half-Life 2, both in that they look kinda similar and that both the games clearly call attention to them, even though they're completely meaningless. It turns out that the Half-Life 2 potato is an Easter egg for an enemy that was in an earlier iteration of the game. I wonder if Prey's magic potato has a similar story. Wait a second.
Oh my god, he's a giant.
Holy shit, I am on the magic potato? And it's a sphere? I'm walking on the surface of a sphere!
That was fucked up.
No, it wasn't. That was fucking awesome!
No. This is fucked up.
Now I'm on the wall and the ship is vomiting everywhere? This game fucking rules! Honestly, I haven't seen anything like these walkways, portals, and variable gravity. It's all just so seamless. Even in Portal, they kind of shove you through the portals. Not here. Eventually, we end up taking a fall so bad that we get delivered to the land of the ancients, where we hang out with Anisi. He introduces us, or reintroduces us, to our Spirit Hawk Talon, teaches us to Spirit Walk, and gives us a Spirit Bow. The Spirit Walk and Spirit Bow are honestly not too impressive to me. Moments when Spirit Walking is necessary felt kinda arbitrary. Spirit Walking isn't even that useful in combat, and while the bow isn't weak or anything, I rarely felt the desire to use it over the other weapons in the game. When I did Spirit Walk, 99% of the time, it was just to press an otherwise inaccessible button, so it's an interesting idea, but I didn't feel like it really worked in the game. As for Talon, Anisi says that he'll help guide you, but the levels are so linear and straightforward that he doesn't really end up doing that. He does, however, translate alien text for you to read. Anyway, back to the metal world.
Alright, this'll rock some shit.
Let's talk about the weapons. The first weapon you get is the wrench. It's pretty standard fare. Left click to swing, hold right click for a power attack. There's something about the way that the goons in the bar ragdoll that I really like, and that's pretty much all I have to say about the wrench. It is, of course, following the tradition set by System Shock and Half-Life to provide the player with a basic tool for their first weapon. Anyway, the first gun you get in Prey is the Hunter Rifle.
Much better than the old wrench.
Very true. It remains the staple gun for the entire rest of the game, providing consistent damage and getting plenty of ammo. I like that it has a mouth. Crawlers are little explosive creatures that you find throughout the ship. Both you and the enemies use them as grenades. I didn't use them that much, but throwing a grenade when you and your target have different gravities definitely made them much more interesting than your average video game grenade. The acid sprayer basically functions like a shotgun, but it's acid instead of shot. The crawler cannon is essentially a rocket launcher, and it's pretty good. The leech gun has 4 different ammo types, which you switch between by leeching them off of nodes placed throughout the game. Red plasma turns it into a minigun of sorts that can mow down enemies. Blue frost lets you freeze enemies in really close range, turning them into ice statues. White lightning turns it into a railgun that can annihilate single targets. And yellow sunbeam, which only appears near the very end of the game, makes the gun fire a laser with so much force that it physically pushes your character back. I thought that red was kind of basic, so I always preferred other ammo types if I could get them. Except that frost is so close range that I consider it kind of worthless, though I do really like the freezing effect. I was a little disappointed to find that they don't shatter if I hit them with a wrench afterwards, but the game's already been blowing my mind with other technological feats, so I can't be too sad about it. Back when you're still only equipped with the rifle and the leech gun, the game throws its first boss at you. The way they introduce the boss is pretty awesome, and actually in general the game has great presentation when introducing all of its enemies. I think the creature design for this boss is great. It's not exactly the most original, but honestly, in my opinion, putting massive cyber demons in your game is never a bad idea. When I first played this boss fight, I remember getting pretty worried about how little damage the boss seems to take. He does a decent amount of damage himself, and there's very little extra ammo and health. After using up everything I had in the leech gun and plenty of rifle ammo, I felt like the boss fight could be feasible, but really tedious and not fun, which, by the way, is not at all uncommon for boss fight design. Except after a little while, these hidey holes open up, and when you go into one, it doesn't actually let you back out. The stream of bullets physically pushes you back in. So I press the button, and the boss's gun hand completes the list of guns in the game. Now you might think that this roster of guns is kinda ho-hum. A rifle, a shotgun, a rocket launcher, a machine gun, nothing we haven't seen a million times before. But what I haven't told you yet is that, as was more typical at the time, right-clicking actually does something with these guns. Nowadays, it's pretty much a universal standard that right-clicking with a gun makes you aim down sights, which just increases accuracy, but you're still otherwise shooting the exact same gun. But in Prey, the autocannon that you get off the first boss can launch grenades, and when you right-click with the rifle, it attaches its eye to yours and it becomes a sniper rifle. In this mode, it chews through a lot more ammo, but it packs a way bigger and more accurate punch for long-range kills. The acid sprayer's right-click will eject a whole canister of acid that splashes in the area that it lands. Get it right, and you can even bank the canister around corners. In addition to being the resident rocket launcher, the crawler cannon can also deploy a strange gas that absorbs and nullifies incoming projectiles. And even the crawlers get different behavior, as right-clicking toggles between using the crawler as a grenade or as a proximity mine. And one of the especially cool things is that your enemies are equipped with almost your entire arsenal, and they make use of both the primary and alternate fires for each weapon. There's so much variety to the guns in this game, and they each fill a specific purpose or role, and it makes having several weapons actually significant. Unlike a lot of other shooters, I found myself actually using all of the guns pretty regularly. The guns are drip-fed to you throughout the game, and the pacing in that regard is pretty good. When they first give you each gun, they also give you a good reason to use it right away, so you get a solid feel for which weapon to use in which situation. Actually, the pacing and level design in this game is kind of awesome from beginning to end. The game kicks off with a bang, absolutely spoiling you with portals, wall walking, gravity changing, and so on. It really milks it for all it's worth while the mechanics are still a novelty, and then it quietly integrates those things into the level design in a way that feels really natural. Suddenly, I'm changing gravity to escape sniper fire and fighting enemies who have a totally different gravity from me, and these aren't set-piece moments, they're just how the game is. Not that the game is shy about using set-piece moments. In fact, this game is filled with cool set pieces. Like I already mentioned, it has some flair with how it introduces enemies. These standout moments really make the most of the linear structure of the game, and they make the game much more memorable. I mean, this magic potato remains one of the most memorable moments of any game I've ever played. And it turns out that magic potatoes are the gift that keeps on giving. One of the late game levels is entirely devoted to walking around on massive magic potatoes. These are honestly so cool. Check this out. I'm flying around in my shuttle, I land, and I walk up to a magic potato that has its own gravity. Switching to the potato's gravity could be more smooth, But otherwise, this is what I consider to be the holy grail of space exploration games. And here Prey is pulling it off a full decade before No Man's Sky, and No Man's Sky has this really awkward transition to it that ruins the whole effect. The shuttle also has a tractor beam, so I got curious and I pulled this meat cube towards the potato. You can see the gravity affects the cube smoothly, and when I let go, it goes right to the potato! This game blows my frickin' mind. And this game isn't shy about showing you awesome pieces of technology or weird and alien architecture. I mean, Halo tells you that you're fighting on an ancient superweapon constructed by a precursor race, but if you showed someone this and asked them where they think it's taking place, they'd never in a million years guess as much. Prey tells you that you've been beamed onto an enormous ship made by aliens, and it means it. In addition to delivering some pretty awesome arenas, the game also has some pretty grim content, in case that wasn't already obvious to you. As you may know, the children in Skyrim can't take damage from any source, but Morrowind and Oblivion don't have children in them at all. Actually, as far as I can tell, Skyrim is the only Elder Scrolls game that has children in it. My guess is that this is primarily because the Elder Scrolls is a pretty grim universe, lots of death, killing, and the like, and trepidation about inserting kids into that kind of narrative is pretty understandable. And that goes double when you consider the possibility of the player being violent towards kids. Well, Prey has no such reservations. Here we see two kids who have been abducted by the aliens, and they're absolutely terrified. One of them gets possessed by a ghost, and it's a possession so violent that their body explodes. They then pick up the other kid and skewer them right in front of us. Later, we hear a kid screaming while running away from an alien hound. The hound was faster. Later on, we get trapped in a room full of ghost kids, and we're forced to gun them down before we can make our escape. They show up again a little later, too. One of the enemy types, the Harvester, can retreat to a wall vagina during combat, and they regenerate while they're in there. And they can also leave from any vagina, regardless of the one they entered. No, you don't. This arena is tough as nails, and it's the first time you fight the Harvesters. Well, I said it's tough as nails, but this game has an interesting approach to difficulty. First of all, there are two difficulty options, but best I can tell, the only difference between them is that the harder difficulty completely removes health pickups from the game. That might sound like it makes the game impossible, but like I said, the game has an interesting approach to difficulty. When you die in Prey, you're transported to the Deathwalk minigame, where you snipe ghosts with your bow. The blue ghosts provide spirit juice, and the red ghosts provide health juice. After a short period, you're sucked out of the Deathwalk arena and put right back where you were when you died. You lose no progress whatsoever. And this isn't on a cooldown or anything. This happens every time you die, no matter what circumstance. You may be familiar with the Millennium Prize problems, which are 7 mathematical problems that each have a $1 million bounty on solving them. To date, only one of those problems has actually been solved, and the mathematician who was offered the award, Grigori Perelman, declined it because he's awesome and he considered his contributions to be equal to those of Richard S. Hamilton, who was not offered the award. Anyway, the other 6 Millennium Prize problems remain unsolved. Well, in my view, player death is one of the great unsolved game design problems. Now, there are a few kinds of games that are designed around dying in a way that makes death mechanically interesting. For example, in Hotline Miami, you die in one hit, but restarting is instant, and each time you try again, you learn a little more about the level, the enemies you're facing, where the weapons are, and so on. So much of the satisfaction in Hotline Miami is making moves on the fly when you start the level, but by the time you finally finish it, so much of those initial improvisations have become solid plans that you execute with precision. This makes the game almost puzzle-like, as patience and learning are just as important as twitch reactions or precise aim. And when you do finally beat a level, it feels like you've actually found a solution to it, which is not true of 99% of shooters. Roguelikes and arcade games similarly bake death into part of the game's design, so those games aren't about getting to the end as much as they are about playing just one more run. But in the vast majority of games where player death is possible, its implementation as a mechanic is an afterthought at best. Oh no, you died in Skyrim. Load a save and try again. Oh no, you died in Halo. Here, start over from this checkpoint and try again. Oh no, you died in Half-Life 2. Well, that's okay, just load a save and try again. Here's the thing. Video games are not natural phenomena. Everything that's in a game has to be put there intentionally. So if every system in a game is going to be intentional, why don't we make sure there's some actual intention behind them? How's the best thing we've come up with? Oh no, well, try again. Especially because in the games I've mentioned, there isn't really a difference in skill between dying or not. Sure, some playstyles will result in certain death, but the more cautious playstyles that get you the victory are rarely going to be more skillful or more fun. Why create a system that punishes playstyles that are potentially a lot more fun? For the challenge? Actually, the entire idea of being upset that a game is too easy or lacking a challenge is kind of frustrating to me. But before I go on, I want to make abundantly clear that I appreciate that there are many different reasons people may play games, and none of them are bad reasons. There's no wrong way to enjoy a game. If you like playing games for the challenge they pose, more power to you. But the thing is, the most vocal people who praise games for being difficult or shit on games for being too easy make two critical mistakes, in my opinion. First of all, they frequently seem to be under the impression that only certain people deserve to play or beat games. I think this is perfectly encapsulated by this viral tweet. Games journalist James Davenport wrote about how he cheated to beat the famously difficult game Sekiro, and Twitter user Fetusberry replied condescending him for cheating, saying, "You cheated not only the game, but yourself." Fetusberry has since clarified that he was going for over-the-top melodrama, and in fact he hadn't played Sekiro at all, and he was not opposed to games having more accessibility options or lower difficulty. Making games extremely difficult to play or beat is inherently going to make them inaccessible to a lot of people who would otherwise want to play, and that's especially true for disabled players. For a lot of people, like the Fetusberry persona, that seems to be the point. Making games easier or less complicated is fiercely opposed by a vocal group of gatekeeping assholes, and they usually complain that games have been dumbed down. The especially frustrating part is that most of those dumbed down mechanics simply make the game more fun. For example, in Morrowind, when you hit people with your sword, you still have a % chance to quote-unquote miss based on your character's stats. In Oblivion, that was dumbed down to be you hit them with your sword when you hit them with your sword. Part of what makes this dumbed down criticism especially frustrating to me is that this is an ancient conflict. On one side, you have people who want to play and enjoy more games, and then on the other, you have assholes who resent the fact that a game they're playing is popular, and so they resist anything that will make the game more fun for more people. People like the Fetusberry persona seem almost insulted that someone would cheat at Sekiro, and seem to think that it somehow ruins the game for the people who beat it legitimately. Earlier I said there's no wrong way to enjoy games, but I'm going to walk that back a bit. If the only way for you to enjoy a game is to make sure other people aren't enjoying it, that's just screwed up. The second thing that people like the Fetusberry persona get wrong is that they seem to think that video games provide a meaningful challenge. Fetusberry says that cheating in Sekiro is also cheating oneself, and that a cheater doesn't grow or improve. The thing is, it's a video game. Again, that's Fetusberry's point. He was being intentionally overdramatic. But the idea that you can meaningfully grow or improve as a person by playing a game is completely ridiculous to me. If you're proud of being good at games, then that's fine. Take pride in it. But don't act like it's something that makes you superior to other people. Anyway, when I say that death is an unsolved problem in game design, I'm not using that as a segue to introduce my solution. If I had a solution, I wouldn't call it an unsolved problem. I have no idea what to do about it. I just know that what we're currently doing sucks. Control, which is an absolutely amazing game, has an accessibility menu that lets you mess with all kinds of settings. While I was playing the game, I realized two things. First, the most fun way to fight enemies was to fling shit at them with my mind. And second, dying and loading a checkpoint did absolutely nothing to improve my experience with the game. So I went into the settings and made it so that my energy regenerated so rapidly that I could feasibly fling shit at people for the entire fight, and I made it so that I could get hurt, but never die. Now, even though the playstyle I find most fun, which is flinging shit at people, isn't normally viable, I can still play the game how I damn well please. Now you might say, well then what's to stop you from just ignoring enemy attacks and sitting out in the open like an idiot? Or from only using melee attacks because enemies pose no threat? Or for that matter from just skipping combat entirely? And the answer is nothing, I guess. Except none of that sounds like it'd be fun, so why would I do that? It's true that invincibility can ruin the combat, but it only does that if you want it to. I still avoided damage as best I could because the game is designed such that avoiding damage is fun, just like pretty much all shooters. But having to load a save because I took some amount of damage arbitrarily considered too much didn't actually improve the experience at all, so I disabled it, and I had a blast acting as if damage did matter, even if it technically didn't. I had already been enjoying the game up to that point, but after I changed those settings, I found myself having a much better time. See, the big problem with having to load a save is that losing progress is just an inherently bad experience in almost all games. There's a reason that checkpoints are universally hated and quick saving is universally loved. Speaking of which, Prey lets you quick save. I only actually quick loaded once or twice in my entire playthrough. Anytime I died, I just did the Deathwalk minigame. Deathwalking came with two distinct advantages over quick loading. First of all, no progress is lost at all, so I don't even have to redo any of the fighting. Second of all, and I think this is the quiet brilliance of it as a mechanic, it's barely an interruption to the gameplay. I already pointed out that part of what makes Hotline Miami so great is that restarting is instant, and if restarting had even a half-second delay, it would be an immeasurably worse experience. Well, in Prey, you're running around and shooting at enemies, and when you die in Deathwalk, you're still running around and shooting at enemies. The basic experience isn't interrupted at all, unlike, say, a death screen or loading screen, where you go from playing the game to suddenly doing nothing at all. The other thing that makes Deathwalking a compromise to God mode is that, sure, you can let it ruin the combat for you, but Deathwalking is decidedly less fun than the normal fights, so you'll want to avoid it. But therein lies its critical failure. For Deathwalking to work, it has to intentionally be made less fun. So while I think Deathwalking is a marked improvement over having to load a save or checkpoint, I also think God mode is still better than Deathwalking. But I do think that Deathwalking is onto something by making sure that the punishment for death doesn't interrupt the gameplay experience or make you have to tediously retry something. And I really appreciate that Prey is actually putting some thought into death as a mechanic. Speaking of difficulty, I already mentioned that the game has boss fights. In my opinion, this first one was the hardest. Overall, I actually quite enjoyed the boss fights in this game. They had cool presentation and some narrative bite to them. I mean, this Centurion boss fight is pretty much only in the game to make the player feel like a badass, because chopping off a massive beast's gun hand and using said gun hand to kill its original owner is undeniably awesome. The second boss is your girlfriend Jen, who's been turned into a weapon, and that has some pretty obvious narrative weight to it. The third boss is Keeper, and at this point, Tommy is still kind of under the impression that Keeper is running the whole show, but he's easily the most boring boss fight. Then at the end of the game, you face off against Mother herself. In all of these cases, the boss fight health bar is actually really communicative. I already pointed out how the Centurion's health bar made me worried about how effective the rifle is going to be, gently nudging me to find the boss's gimmick. Jen heals herself when she gets low enough, guiding you to take out her drones, and Keeper and Mother are only damageable under certain conditions, and the health bar makes that immediately obvious. I only point this out because in a lot of games with boss fights, the boss fights are basically just endurance tests, and you have to perform extremely well, maybe even perfectly, for long enough to drain their health. As a result, the health bars function basically just like timers. But in Prey, the game never demands exceptional skill, and the health bars are used to guide you to discovering what to do to beat each boss. Up to this point, I've been talking about all the good things in this game. So, what about the bad? Well, I already mentioned that I thought the Spirit Walk felt kinda underwhelming, even if it sounds like a good idea on paper. And I brought up that the Keeper boss fight is pretty boring, but what's worse is that for a short while after, Keepers keep showing up as common enemies. This is by far the worst part of the game, and the only time I felt like it was kind of a drag. Keepers are simply too tanky for my liking. Luckily, Mother decides to kill all the Keepers in front of you, and I have to admit to feeling a certain perverse satisfaction out of this. And while I did praise the level design and interesting set pieces, it is worth noting that the game's environments are inherently kinda monotonous. The whole game takes place on the Metal World, except for some brief breaks in the Land of the Ancients. I always like when games provide a huge variety of environments, and this game doesn't really. They do make a good go of it, though. Also, the main plot is pretty much throwaway. I'm abducted by aliens, and in response, I go kill their mother. So, not exactly an intricately woven fabric, more like a coarse rope that tugs the player along through the gameplay. And I was praising the guns earlier, but the actual feeling of the guns is lacking a certain punch that guns have in other shooters, even in shooters from before 2006. It's kind of hard to pin down what exactly is missing, but shooting just feels vaguely unsatisfying. I played some of it earlier, but let's give a listen to the menu music. I kinda love it. It sounds haunting and paranoid, and it fits the atmosphere of the game perfectly. Oh wait, no, now it's just generic orchestral music. Okay. I don't really have a problem with orchestral music, but I do find it kind of annoying that it's basically the default for soundtracks. Orchestral soundtracks can sound really good and really fitting, but most of the time, games and movies would be better suited with different instrumentation. The composer for this game is actually a pretty accomplished orchestral games soundtrack composer, Jeremy Soule. You might recognize him for other, much more memorable pieces like this. Or this. Or this. Unfortunately, what we got in Prey is not nearly so memorable or nearly so fitting. You might also recognize Jeremy Soule from headlines like this. Given this game's casual grimness and graphic violence, wouldn't something like what was playing in the bar fit way better? I think it would. In the original 1995 incarnation of the game, the soundtrack was to be made by industrial band KMFDM. As far as I can tell, almost all of the tracks they made were lost, but there were 3 songs released by 3D Realms. I could do without the vocals, but even still, I think this is way better than the generic orchestral stuff that we got. See what I mean? So, what to make of Prey? In case it wasn't obvious, I think very highly of it. Its edgy content, grim mood, and graphic violence are all things that I really liked. They even had enemies you could decapitate, which is awesome, and if you manage to take out the Harvester's lower body, they'll crawl towards you to try a last-ditch suicide bombing attempt. And the levels, my god, the levels! I honestly can't think of any other game that provides environments that are both this interesting and this much fun to fight in. And enemies falling up or to the side because one or both of us were fighting on the wrong gravity never got old. I also really respect that the game was trying new things, even if they didn't all quite work. It's awesome that they were experimenting with how player death should function, and it's almost annoying to me that other games aren't willing to take the same risk, and we've been stuck with the same bad, brainless implementation that Prey was trying to avoid. One additional risk that the game took was centering the story on Cherokee mythology with a Cherokee protagonist. The protagonist's voice actor, who is Plains Cree, has said that he offered a lot of feedback to 3D Realms on the story, and that the writers almost always made changes according to his notes. How many video games have you playing some white guy who saves the world? Thousands? I'm not even saying that such a game is inherently bad or flawed, just plain overdone. If nothing else, it's nice to see something different. The thing is, though, it's not just different. The game is doing some genuinely interesting stuff thematically. This is a story of a bunch of people minding their own business who are suddenly invaded by a foreign power with way more advanced technology, and then they make the protagonist Native American. The game explicitly connects weaponry with culture and identity.
The army taught me to kill, remember?
You fought in white man's wars, with white man's weapons. Now it is time to fight with your own.
And then has you use the aliens' weapons against them. With Talon's help, you learn to read the alien language, and on top of that, there's also a subtle effect the game pulls off that I think is so damn cool. After playing for a while, I realized that I could start to make out some of what the hunters are saying. At first, I figured I was just getting used to the voice lines, but replaying the footage, I realized that no, the hunters absolutely speak gibberish at the beginning. But their voice lines gradually introduce more and more English words over the course of the game. By the end, you can understand them almost perfectly. The game also goes into the nature of Mother and the function of the metal world. Now, putting all these pieces together is way outside the scope of this video, and I couldn't provide the necessary indigenous perspective anyway, but that alone is kind of high praise. How often can you even say that a shooter has complicated or interesting thematic insight? So, taken all together, it probably won't surprise anyone when I say that Prey is one of my favorite single-player shooters of all time. Despite its few shortcomings, the game's technology still blows my mind a full 16 years after the game's release, and it delivers a ton of great, memorable levels that are fun and well designed. Well, right off the bat, I can already hear a huge difference in this game. This menu music is exactly what I mean when I say that I wish soundtrack composers would let go of orchestral music. The theme song here does a great job of both setting the mood and matching the game's aesthetic. The composer for this game is Mick Gordon, who doesn't have a huge number of high-profile soundtracks under his belt, but they're all good. Easily his most famous and acclaimed work is the soundtrack to the 2016 Doom reboot. Anyway, back to Prey.
Good morning, Morgan. Today is Monday, March 15th, 2032.
Aw man, looks like I'm early with the video. So it seems the main takeaway from this intro is that I can pick up and throw basically everything in the game, which is pretty awesome in my opinion. Adding this kind of stuff in your level design is not a small undertaking, and I for one really appreciate the effort. One time a friend of mine was talking about how he'd like to play a game that's something like Payday 2, only every item can be picked up and stolen. So in addition to the duffel bags with hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, you can also toss that coffee mug into the van for an extra $20, or steal all the pins out of this guy's vest for $2 or $3. I think it's a solid idea, and Prey kinda proves it. They even let me have my coffee just the way I like it. Alright, now I'm ready to take on the day. I make some idle chat with the maintenance worker in the hallway, but she says she isn't supposed to talk to me. I guess she has some pretty overbearing bosses who are watching her on the camera, and if they see her chatting, they'll just assume she's slacking off. I like her light though, so I'll be taking it with me. She seems cool with it. Unfortunately, there's no way for me to bring it with me into the helicopter.
Ms. Yu, please make yourself comfortable and we'll be on our way. TranStar facility is just a short hop.
Oh god, am I hallucinating?
78 degrees. Clear skies all the way.
So now we have a nice helicopter trip while some synthwave plays. Once again, I'm happy with the instrumentation, but this song is really generic. Like, if I pause it real quick, I'm willing to bet you've already forgotten how the song goes. It's basically the synthwave equivalent of elevator music, vaguely pleasant and instantly forgettable. And that makes sense in this setting, but it's still a little disappointing.
That's a nice view on the bay there.
Man, it sucks that all I'm hallucinating are company names. Let's go ahead and speed this up a bit. Wait a second, isn't that my apartment? Why'd we take this huge roundabout trip? Why didn't I just walk? Well, if you're gonna make me sit through company names, I guess that was a decent way to present them.
Hello, Dr. Yu.
Okay, hold up a second. Have you ever seen pictures that have just kind of bad composition? And like, you get what the picture's about, but it's almost vaguely frustrating to look at? Well, back when I saw Far Cry 5's gameplay reveal, I was getting that same kind of feeling. Something was just off, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Well, I ended up getting Far Cry 5 a few years after it came out, and the problem became obvious to me immediately. Why the hell is the crosshair all the way down there? Honestly, I hate this lowered crosshair. I'm super accustomed to aiming at the center of the screen, so in order to hit people with the lowered crosshair, I have to actually aim a fair bit above them. At best, it's unnatural and kinda awkward. At worst, it's almost nauseating for me to try to play like this. Thankfully, Far Cry 5 gives me the option to fix it. Apparently, the lower crosshair is more comfortable for people who are sitting on a couch and playing on their TV, because that's closer to the level eyesight. But given that this is the PC copy, I'm not really sure why they didn't change the default setting. Anyway, for Prey, the crosshair is shoved way out of position, and there's no setting to fix it. There are a lot of settings that I think are kind of dumb but still nice to include, like turning off arbitrary parts of the HUD, but nothing to make the crosshair not be awful. Is this just a me thing? Am I the only person who cares about the crosshair? I played a little bit of Outer Worlds, and the crosshair's offset made me stop playing before I even finished the tutorial. You might think that's kind of extreme, but like I said, it was nauseating. Well, at the very least, it isn't just a me thing, as other people have already figured out how to fix it in Prey. You have to edit a config file located in the games directory. This also looks like the only way to turn off motion blur too, so let's go ahead and kill two birds with one stone. Apparently, you also have to mark the file as read-only to prevent the game from overriding it with the default values. Go figure. But the fact that I can change the crosshair's position without messing up my aim implies that the game could support really any arbitrary crosshair position on the screen, which I think is awesome, except that the developers didn't feel like exposing that to users in the settings menu. In my opinion, there's no such thing as too many settings. I'll always prefer to have the option to change something, even if I don't actually end up changing it. So the exclusion of motion blur and fixing the crosshair is pretty damn annoying. Well, at least there's a workaround, so let's hop back in. Wait, I can't skip these? Seriously? Much better. And now we can play the game! So we head down the elevator and meet up with our brother Alex.
You don't look terrible in a TranStar uniform.
Wow, we get right up in his face.
I know the test might seem a little unconventional, but it's a Yu family tradition.
Okay, let's get right to it.
For this first test, I'd like you to remove the boxes from the red circle as quickly as you can. Just go with your gut. Okay? Wonderful. Press the red button when you're ready.
Am I ever? I've been practicing all morning.
Wonderful. You're absolutely fine.
Oh, I didn't do a good job? Fuck you, I put my heart and soul into this.
Okay, Morgan, listen carefully. I'd like you to do your best to hide in this room.
Hide? Okay, this game is hilarious. I especially love that there's no way to keep this chair upright after you pick it up. This is goofy stuff, I'm a fan. Dr. Bellamy isn't impressed.
Any synaptic register? At all? No? Well, that's fine. Sorry, let's keep things moving, Morgan. Head into room
Jerk.
C. You're doing marvelous. For this test, please press the blue button across the room as quickly as you can.
Okay. Video game tutorials get a lot of flack, and I think it's for good reason, but this stands out to me as an especially sucky one. They are secretly doing something kind of fun narratively, which you won't get until you play this part again with knowledge you obtain much later in the game. It reminds me a bit of this line from Bioshock Infinite.
Perhaps you should ask him. I imagine he has a greater interest in getting there than I do.
I suppose he does, but there's no point in asking.
Why not?
Because he doesn't row.
He doesn't row?
No, he doesn't row.
Ah, I see what you mean.
Except it's worse. Anyway, these tests are just a little too slow and boring for my taste. They don't really help build tension or establish characters or build atmosphere or anything like that, and they're pretty bad at teaching me the game, and they're pretty boring. So I can't really say I like them or understand why they're in the game at all. The bit where the doctors are clearly taking issue with my performance, even though they're really vague about it, is the highlight, and it's not much of a highlight.
I'm sorry, can someone please explain to me what's happening? Simmons?
I installed exactly what Tina brought down.
Did you double check?
Speaker's still on.
I apologize, Morgan. We're having some trouble with the equipment. Not your fault. You're doing fabulous, actually. One last room. Let's step into D. I'm going to show you a series of questions. Pick the answer that makes the most sense to you. Press start on the screen when you're ready.
Okay, now we're taking a multiple choice quiz. Fun. And now they are literally just asking me about the trolley problem. Really deep and insightful stuff, game.
I want you to take a good look at it.
Ooh, now we're getting
In
somewhere.
a moment, I'm going to ask you what... is my coffee? It's empty.
Oh, hell yeah, let's get started.
Good morning, Morgan. Today is Monday, March 15th, 2032.
Oh man, I'm early with the video. Man, I had the weirdest dream. The music here sounds really ominous, which is a bit weird because nothing's happened yet. I like that I can pick up and throw basically everything I see. I remember a friend of mine talking about how he'd like to play a game that's like Payday 2, only... Huh? Leave now? I haven't had my coffee yet. Okay, now I'm ready to take on the day. Oh shit. I guess I'll loot her? Seems kinda callous, but this is a video game and rules are rules.
Hello, Morgan. It's time we spoke. My code name is January. You're not dreaming. What happened yesterday was real. If you want to know what's going on, first, you need to get out of your apartment building. You're not safe.
Well, I'd like to, but the hallway has a wall that wasn't here before. All the doors are locked, but I've got a wrench, and that looks like a pretty vulnerable window to me. Oh, damn. Yeah, these are called looking glass screens, and they appear as decoration throughout the rest of the game, too. Well, let's take a look around. February 22nd, 2035? Wait a second, that means... Hell yeah, I wasn't early on the video at all! I'm right on time! Anyway, we're now introduced to our first enemy.
Typhon Cacoplasmus. Everyone calls them mimics. Be careful what you pick up.
Okay, so January tells us to be careful what we pick up, but honestly, mimics never pose that much of a threat. First of all, they only take a few hits with the wrench to annihilate, and while they technically can lie in wait disguised as some random object, they're extremely impatient and will undisguise themselves constantly. But even if they were more clever, early in the game you get a tool called the Psychoscope, which can detect mimics even while they're disguised. So even though mimics and their power are kind of the poster child of the game, they're very underwhelming as enemies. Ah, play your way. Okay, sure, I'll bite. First of all, this tip is kinda hilarious. It takes on this sort of self-aggrandizing tone about how the game will give you so many different options to approach each problem, and then explicitly tells you that there are only two ways forward. Find the keycard for the door, or take the vent. I've seen some people say that this game's level design is genius, simply because there are so many different options to completing a given task. First of all, not really. Like I said, there's only two ways forward here, and they're both pretty much the same. Or hey, look at this. If I want to collect these flowers, I can jump and grab them from the top, or I can smash the glass and grab them directly. Play your way. That's how most of the game is structured. 2 or 3 ways to get to the thing you're interested in, but those different ways aren't really all that different. And that's fine, but I've played tons and tons of games that have multiple doors into the same room. Are these brilliantly designed levels? Honestly, I don't think I'd even bring this up, except the game paused itself just to point out to me how clever its own level design is, even though it isn't. A few mimics later, and we're introduced to the game's skill tree. Ugh, this skill tree. So, in my experience, skill trees broadly fall into one of 3 categories. First, you have skill trees that are just kind of boring. They provide things like slightly more damage with a certain kind of weapon, or sneaking is more effective. Things like that. When you get a skill in a boring skill tree, it doesn't really feel impactful. The game could just not have the skill tree at all, and the gameplay experience would barely be affected. I think these are the most common skill trees. Then you have wacky skill trees. I think these are the most rare, but they're on the rise. In a wacky skill tree, taking a skill changes the gameplay in a way that's fun or interesting or engaging. Maybe they give you a new ability, or change the way one of your abilities works, or give you a really dramatic improvement. Bonus points if that improvement is only applied under certain conditions. These are great. Then you have praise skill tree. If wacky skill trees are good and boring skill trees are bad, then praise skill tree is ugly. It has elements of a boring skill tree, like meager improvements to health, damage, stamina, movement speed, and sneaking, but it also has skills that are extremely useful, like being able to hack doors and safes, or upgrade your weapons, or carry more stuff in your extremely small inventory, or move heavy objects that may block your path. This sucks. I'll try to show you why. Look here, I need to get in that other room. Well, there are exactly 3 ways in. This door, which is getting zapped by that broken power router, this vent, which is blocked, or this extremely long roundabout vent, which is incredibly inconvenient. Play your way. Now you can use the glue gun to temporarily keep the junction from zapping you, and that's fine for going into the room, but won't work coming back. While it's plugged up, you can repair it, but that requires a high repair skill. And you can move this stuff out of the way of the vent, but that requires a high leverage skill. And if you've instead invested in hacking, which is frequently used to open doors and is often the only way to gain access to computers which contain extra world building or safes which contain extra loot, then you likely don't have the skill points left over to get repair or leverage, so you're stuck doing this annoying route instead. And God forbid you've invested in other things you might have liked, like move speed or extra damage to speed up the combat. And this also ties back to what I was saying about the level design. It isn't clever, it's just annoying. And the best way to avoid tedious, annoying routes is by investing neuromods in skills to access the more convenient routes. Or how about this one? I need to access the satellite, but its console requires repair 3. That's a huge investment. 12 neuromods. And how often would I even use that outside of this one side quest? I thought surely there must be another way to access the satellite. So I looked around a bit, but I couldn't see anything obvious until bam, there it is, a button inside that I could probably hit through this hole. The game makes a big deal of how this toy crossbow can shoot foam darts to push buttons. They tell you very explicitly several times that that is the point of the gun. I actually think this is a hilarious and awesome idea, but this is the only time I even thought to use it, and it failed me. Play your way. The way you create a skill tree like the one in Prey is by starting with a good, fully featured game, and then stripping away mechanics and barring them behind arbitrary work. Why don't we just give the player a good game from the start? Why make them unlock fun mechanics that could just be baseline? If someone wants to take more hits or deal more damage, why would they blow precious neuromods getting the skills for it instead of just lowering the difficulty? I'm actually pretty sure that you can beat this entire game without getting a single skill, but you'd miss out on a bunch of content and you'd have a pretty miserable time with navigation and combat. You do end up getting more skills in this skill tree after you pick up the Psychoscope. The Psychoscope can scan enemies, which gives you more information about them in your log, and also gives you access to purchasing Typhon abilities with neuromods. I still don't think these are anything too great, but it is much more interesting than the human skills. Except by the time I picked up the Psychoscope, I was 3 hours into the game. Why hold out on the player for so long? It's not even a significant narrative moment. I like the idea of the lift field, but it's not that useful because you can already glide around, create new geometry with the glue gun, and if you do a certain side quest, you can get little jump boosts. I also thought that the Phantom Shift ability would be useful for platforming, but you get almost no control over it, so I'm not really sure what the point is. After the crossbow proved it couldn't live up to its reputation, I got remote manipulation, which I maybe used 2 or 3 times throughout the entire run, and only ever to press out of reach buttons. Similarly, I held out on getting the Mimic ability until there were rooms that I couldn't immediately find an alternate entrance to. I do have to admit that there's a certain joy the first time I dropped some lemons out of my pockets so that I could mimic them, roll into a room, then open the door to come retrieve my lemons again. But the remote button pressing and mimicry together reminded me a lot of the spirit walking from the original Prey. They seemed like neat ideas on paper, but in practice, they feel really mundane and just not that interesting. Except that the spirit walking didn't have an active cost while you were spiriting around, whereas using any Typhon abilities costs Psi. For the majority of the game, the only way to recover Psi is using Psi hypos, and if you don't craft any, there's a finite number of them that you can find. As a result, I was really cautious about using my Typhon powers at all, and of course, you don't really want to be crafting Psi hypos because, wait, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll come back to that. The rest of the Typhon skills are basically just different variations of deal some damage. In my opinion, the only one that's worthwhile is Psychoshock, because it does a ton of single target damage and prevents them from using their abilities. And between the mental damage from that and the physical damage from your guns, you basically have all the damage types you'll need. So I use Psychoshock a lot, even though I find it considerably less enjoyable than just shooting the baddies. The problem is, just shoot the baddies is not a viable strategy at all. In the early stages of the game, I got kind of confused about how exactly I was supposed to be approaching the enemies in this game. The game has a stealth system, and it's the same one-size-fits-all generic detection system you'd expect. The game makes a big deal about how the Typhon are sort of unknowable alien creatures with a completely different nature than us, but then we can also just sneak around them, and that feels kind of weird. Anyway, the problem I kept having was that the Phantoms were in a really weird spot where they were very plentiful and not that threatening, but pretty durable. And while I could avoid detection, that would make navigating the levels a lot more annoying, and it didn't feel worth it for me. But killing Phantoms and Mimics absolutely chewed through my ammo. These guys are not exactly pushovers. Is the pistol just kind of useless? Well, I don't have anything better yet. Honestly, the Phantoms are just tanky enough to trigger that same feeling that the original Prey Centurion gave me. Am I doing something wrong? Is there a gimmick I'm missing? Or is this game just kind of bullshit? As far as I can tell, there's no gimmick. Phantoms are just built to last. Coming back, I discovered that the game spawned another Phantom. What the hell? I mean, I get that it wouldn't be much of a crisis or an outbreak if I could just single-handedly clear it all out with my trusty pistol, but spawning a new Phantom on the same level mere minutes after I cleared this room, that's hitting a point I do not like. When I'm playing a single-player shooter, I'm basically going to kill as much as is convenient to me, because I think that's fun. In contrast, when I'm playing an MMO, I'm under no delusion that I could ever hope to clear even all the enemies within sight before they start respawning, because that's how MMOs work. This also means that I'll avoid any fight that I can in an MMO, because killing enemies is an inherently Sisyphean task. Is that what Prey is teaching me with this? If enemies are replaced immediately after I kill them, that tells me that killing them, a central feature of the gameplay for a shooter, is pointless. And while that makes sense narratively, it feels awful mechanically. Why would I bother killing them then? Why wouldn't I just sneak or hell sprint past them? Neither of those actually sound like fun, but neither does having to kill and re-kill the same enemies over and over again just to get around. Fortunately, Prey's enemy respawning is attached to specific quests. That means that it isn't a system that causes enemies to respawn forever. Each respawn is a one-time thing. It's just that this specific instance of it is especially bad and especially early in the game. Overall, I actually think this is an awesome idea because it does convey the scope of the crisis without making the gameplay itself feel futile, and it contributes to the narrative and atmosphere in an interesting way. Leaving a level and then returning to it much later to find that it's totally different, including freshly spawned enemies, gives the sense of an ever-evolving, ever-worsening situation. Anyway, about 2 hours in, I decided the best option was to just lower the difficulty. I hadn't even died yet, but the combat was so unsatisfying because everything just took a little too long to kill. Lowering the difficulty didn't help tremendously with how durable the enemies were, but I did find myself enjoying the game more. I also really appreciate that story difficulty really is ridiculously easy. I could face tank any enemy or just stand in electricity, and I'd be totally fine. But I still didn't find any of the enemies to be that interesting or fun to fight. I saw a lot of them the same way I did these boxes that blocked me at the only convenient path near the start of the game. They were just an obstacle, and not in a fun or engaging way. I did really like how they introduced the poltergeist. And I did generally enjoy fighting telepaths, because you'd have to sneak around their thralls without getting detected, so you can get in close for a clean kill, or else the thralls would come to try to suicide bomb on you, and killing the telepath frees them from the mind control. One of the central features of this game is that anything you can carry in your inventory can be recycled into 4 base materials, and then those base materials can be used to craft all kinds of things. And you can find more recipes by exploring and doing side quests. I think this is pretty neat. There's just something about going around and hoarding random trash to later scrap down and recycle that makes my brain happy. I really liked it in Fallout 4 too, cleaning up the wasteland one desk fan at a time. It is kind of annoying that you can only recycle and craft at these stations, and they aren't always placed in particularly easy to access spots. Combine that with the fairly small inventory size, and you'll be backtracking to recycle a lot. And while recycling is nice and snappy, repeat crafting has an unskippable animation that makes it considerably more tedious and time-consuming than it needs to be. Why aren't these just a submenu in the inventory, accessible at all times and allowing you to batch craft? Anyway, one of the 4 base components is exotic materials, which is basically Typhon juice. So you need it to make Psi-Hypos, but you also need it to make neuromods. And that's why you don't want to be making Psi-Hypos. Exotic materials are precious and rare, and given how important neuromods are to just making the game enjoyable, you don't want to waste a drop. What the fuck? DRM? Copy protection? Really, game? You know, I was trying to be polite, I wasn't going to bring it up, but if you want to start shit, let's get some shit started. Okay, first of all, I'll address what just happened strictly in terms of the game mechanics. By now, I hope I've made it pretty clear that I hate this skill tree, because the vast majority of it basically boils down to which annoyance that we added to the game would you like to get rid of next? I was hoping I'd be able to just blast through it early by focusing on crafting tons of neuromods so that I could just enjoy the game without all the arbitrary annoyances. Hell, I was so dead set on this plan that I actually invested in 2 different talents to help. This one makes recycling have larger yields, and this one lets me get more Typhon organs, which the skill explicitly notes makes it easier to craft neuromods. So I've made these investments to try to speed through a skill tree I find annoying, which I only want to do because it has skills whose only purpose is to remove annoyances in the game, and in response, the game throws up a brick wall on making neuromods, locking further neuromod crafting behind an out-of-the-way side quest. Just one more annoyance to throw up in my quest to remove annoyances. Fuck this game. It's working so hard to keep me from enjoying it. But what really grinds my gears about this side quest is all the fluff they've built around it. The error mentions DRM and authorization keys, and the quest name is copy protection. In case you're not familiar with those terms, let me bring you up to speed. Digital items, like games or software, are incredibly inexpensive to replicate. If you see a JPEG on the internet, right-click saving is incredibly easy, and other than the electricity and internet bills you'd be paying anyway, it's free. Compare that to a painting. Just getting the canvas and paints is already a significant upfront cost, and that's before you even get to the painting part. if I have a game on my computer and you'd like to play it on yours, it's incredibly easy to transfer over. If the game is small enough, I could just hand it over to you on a thumb drive, and now we're both playing the game on our separate computers. This is objectively awesome, and a testament to how much of a marvel computer technology really is. But it's also obviously incompatible with capitalism. As a result, developers create copy protection to, well, prevent people from copying their software. For games, this has gone through a lot of different iterations. Early games would interrupt themselves to give you a challenge that required information from the manual to complete, but those challenges fell out of common use by the mid-1990s. After that, activation keys were extremely common. Each copy of the game would have a unique key printed in its manual, and you'd simply have to provide that key when you install the game, and that was it. Nowadays, copy protection is almost exclusively performed by server authentication. For example, games you own on Steam are tied to your account, and you need to sign in to access them. One common criticism of DRM, which is basically another name for copy protection, is that it can be inconvenient to legitimate users. Those early copy protection challenges are an obvious example, because, like I said, the game would literally interrupt itself to make you go pull out your manual and get the necessary information. But even now, if you want to play Steam games while your internet is down, you're screwed unless you were signed in at the time of your internet outage. I remember back when I got Red Alert 3, the CD key printed in my manual was 1 character short. I sat there re-entering the entire CD key time and time again just to go through the alphabet on the last character. Also, in 2004, Ubisoft just forgot to include CD keys for every copy of Splinter Cell Pandora Tomorrow that shipped to Australia. That sucks. And these are all inconveniences that don't even require false positives, times when users who've purchased their copy legitimately are mistakenly flagged as pirates. You may be familiar with the term lost film. It refers to movies that literally don't exist anymore because every copy has been destroyed or lost. Now, I'm a film nerd, so this might matter more to me than others, but the Film Foundation estimates that over half of American movies made before 1950 are lost, and over 90% of the films made before 1929 are lost. That is a staggeringly enormous number. The short version of why that happened is that the technology and appetite for film preservation in the old days isn't what it is today, but essentially the opposite is happening for software. Left alone, software archival is incredibly easy, but technology and laws have developed to prevent archival and preservation. So, yeah, I think that criticism of DRM as inconvenient to legitimate users is well deserved, but in my opinion, it's kind of overshadowed by a much bigger problem. If DRM for a game is 100% successful at preventing illegitimate duplication, it means that that game is destined to become scarce, or worse, be entirely eradicated from existence as soon as publishers or distributors decide to stop selling it. So if we just left it alone, games would be infinitely replicable basically for free. Instead, there are now hundreds, maybe thousands of games that are already lost. And every single lost game I'm showing you here was released after 2008. Unlike lost films, the games we've lost due to DRM, and the games we're on track to lose, aren't the old and obscure ones. The more popular and recent a game is, the more likely it's made with bullshit that ensures it'll be eradicated the moment the publisher decides to stop selling it. And that brings us back to Prey. No, the other Prey. This game is abandonware, which means that the rights holders are no longer selling it. Prey used to be on Steam, but it isn't anymore. Well, actually, it is on Steam. If you redeemed the game on Steam, you can still download and play it. It's attached to your account, but you can no longer purchase it off the storefront. You're left with only 3 options if you want to play the original Prey. Purchase a copy secondhand from eBay or something similar, get one from a shady key reseller, or pirate it. So the only way to get abandonware without unnecessary risk or hassle is to pirate it. And even if you do purchase it legally, the rights holders won't see a dime from that transaction anyway. Abandonware is in kind of a legal gray area. I mean, some lawyer will tell you that they aren't, but in practice, abandonware is shared around very openly and rarely gets legally challenged. But if the copy protection had worked perfectly, then the only way to get Prey would be risky and/or inconvenient. That's better than games that have been permanently destroyed, but still. The thing is, back when Human Head was still working on Prey 2, ZeniMax started playing hardball. They wanted to acquire Human Head, who were experts with working in id Tech, and like I had mentioned, ZeniMax had just acquired id Software shortly before acquiring the Prey IP. So ZeniMax promised more time and money to make the game polished, and then suddenly cut off funding and asked for work without a reasonable deadline. Human Head was contractually obligated to do no work other than Prey 2, and they weren't getting the funding necessary to keep development going. ZeniMax made their offer to purchase the studio, and Human Head declined. They then decided to stop working on Prey 2 altogether as a sort of strike, and shortly thereafter, ZeniMax canceled Prey 2. After ZeniMax handed over the IP to Arcane Studios, they decided to scrap all of Human Head's work on the project, even though it was apparently pretty far along. Arcane made an entirely unrelated game, and the bastards at ZeniMax decided to name it just Prey, and then pulled the original game from sale. Because apparently, intentionally trying to destroy a company to buy them out for peanuts wasn't enough. They also had to do everything in their power to erase what Human Head had already made. What's worse is that Arcane reportedly didn't even want to make a Prey game. Yeah, games publishers are no one's friends. They're run by the greediest bastards you'll ever meet, and they couldn't give less of a shit about games, the people who play them, or the people who make them. ZeniMax did everything in their power to erase the original Prey from existence, and the only reason it's still around is because its copy protection was easily broken. So the fact that a little joke about DRM shows up in the new Prey is really frustrating to me, and the whole situation just makes me hope that Pete Hines had a bad day today. Anyway, I did eventually find myself actually enjoying the game. Instead of this, combat now looks like this. I've got high-level hacking, I can move most heavy objects, and my inventory finally has a decent size to it. But this is 8 hours into the game. Ironically, now that the game's getting fun, they let you just leave the station early via the side quest Who is December. I'd like to say that up to this point, I have been loving the narrative. It's filled with so much mystery about the station, the research done there, what exactly the Typhon are or what they want, and a ton of intrigue. The game gives you a bunch of characters who tell you what to do, and absolutely no reason to trust any of them. Throughout the whole game, January, who's a robot that you programmed with your own voice, and your brother Alex constantly butt heads over exactly what's going on and what to do about it. I read every single email in the game and every scrap of paper I could find, and I enjoyed it enormously. Check this out. Every single human is named. You have access to a huge list of, I think, every single person stationed at Talos 1, and you can find all of them out in the levels. Sure, all but a dozen or so are dead, but how many games bother to name every person you find? This is great. My favorite quest in the game has you snooping through voice recordings of a character named Danielle Show, because you need to reconstruct her voice with enough samples to get past a door that she voice locked. First of all, I think the callousness of invading her privacy just to get on with your agenda makes this a pretty neat quest. It's basically like grave robbing, except we're not just grabbing loot, we're impersonating her identity. What makes the quest really shine, though, is that the recordings we find are snapshots of Danielle's romantic relationship with her coworker Abigail Foy. So we get tidbits of the crush, the happy relationship, and the rough breakup, including brainstormed apology notes. Overall, I'd say the narrative pacing to this game is fantastic, and the intrigue was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and I just loved soaking it up. But towards the end of the game, things fall apart pretty fast. First of all, the levels are flooded with these military drones. I hate these drones. They're pretty resistant to bullets, and while I can stun them with either the stun gun or EMPs, they're still durable as hell when they're downed. I can hack them if they're stunned or if they haven't detected me yet, but then I'd have to do the hacking minigame. This minigame just plain sucks. Video games have a rich history of minigames for activities like hacking or lockpicking. For me to like one, it has to meet 2 criteria. First, it can't be too annoying or tedious, and second, it has to aesthetically match the activity that's going on. Take Skyrim's lockpicking. On its own, it's not really fun, but it's also not annoying. and playing it does kind of feel like how lockpicking looks in movies. Or look at hacking in a Bethesda Fallout game. This is an enjoyable enough puzzle. It's basically just Mastermind, which I think the kids call Wordle these days. And it looks more or less like a RAM dump, which is both a real thing and potentially a legitimate way to find a password. So what the fuck is this in Prey? What is this supposed to be? In what way is hacking like trying to drive a bumper car onto 1 to 4 destinations? This isn't fun or engaging at all. And the penalty for failure? Just a kiss of damage. Why? I already have to invest the neuromods into higher hacking levels just for the opportunity to play the minigame. Why not make it like Deus Ex, where I click the hack button and as long as I have the appropriate skill level, it just is hacked? This is shit. Put some intention in your games, damn it. So yeah, like I said, I hate these military drones. They're extremely durable and extremely numerous, and they're just flying boxes with lasers. If you were telling me about a shooter where all the enemies were just floating boxes with lasers, I'd assume it was a game really early in development, and they hadn't actually made models for the enemies or their projectiles yet. But no, flying laser boxes is just what the game is offering here. Now more than ever, I decided to just sprint past and ignore most of the enemies. Once again, the game is trying really hard to not be fun, and it's pretty much succeeding, so yeah, I'll just skip that part of the gameplay. The game ends very shortly after the military drones show up. I said earlier that I'm only going to provide minor spoilers for Prey, and that's true, but in my opinion, the entire ending of the game is a minor spoiler. Because it's shit. And I don't just mean that it's bad and therefore I can tell you about it. Part of what makes it such a bad ending is that I can show it to you and it won't spoil a damn thing. Now, if you don't believe me, that's fine. If that's the case, I should warn you that under no circumstances should you try to escape the station via the Who is December quest. But if you don't want me to show you the ending, go ahead and skip to this timestamp. Nobody will judge you. It's cool. See you in a bit. Part of the reason that showing the ending isn't a spoiler is because the game already spoils it itself. Maybe you think I'm exaggerating and the game just does some heavy-handed foreshadowing and I just managed to put the pieces together, but I think it definitely crosses the line here. First off, the reason that I warned the spoilers averse people away from escaping Talos 1 early is because doing so basically just kills you and you'll have to load a save. But before forcing you to load the save, it offers this little tidbit.
We failed. This isn't the one.
This makes it explicitly clear that the entire game, the early tests, the crisis, the untrustworthy characters, everything, is just a contrived test or a simulation that Alex is putting you through. And this escape is available to you halfway through the game, maybe earlier if you do quests in a slightly different order. On top of that, there's a vision you see more and more of at several points in the game, and each time you see it, it's an unavoidable scripted moment. Take a look.
You're not what they say you are. Can you hear us?
Rejecting the new cell lines, spiking them up like an antivirus.
They're free.
Would a sedative work?
No. Nothing that interferes with memory formation.
What could I possibly conclude from that except that Earth is already overrun by the Typhon and that the Typhon like me? This is stuff you see pretty early in the game, and it was enough to make me guess the ending perfectly. Speaking of which, here's the ending. We jack out of the simulation, and Alex and several drones who are stand-ins for characters that you met throughout the game all assess your actions. Judging from the way they talk about how I was not a homicidal psychopath, I assume this scene plays out a little differently if you just go around killing everyone you meet. They bring up specific choices I made in various quests, and then the big reveal. Oh my god, the Earth is already overrun by the Typhon. Who could have seen this coming? I hate this ending. Maybe the writers thought this was clever by making it so that the player and the player character were both, in essence, playing a video game. Well, that just isn't clever. But what's worse is, to me, this retroactively sucks the significance out of everything you just played. If the characters themselves don't care about anything I do, or about any of the humans I save or kill, then why should I?
Alex, it killed you.
Back then, I would have done the same thing to me.
This sucks. Two characters both telling me conflicting information about the situation and what to do about it, and neither of them really giving me a good reason to trust them, gives a sense of tension and intrigue. But when you learn that everything was just a contrived simulation, it makes it all seem pointless. And for the record, Alex wants you to kill all the Typhon, but preserve the research, whereas January wants you to blow up the entire station, including yourself, because you have all that Typhon goop inside of you. But these are both effectively the same decision in the game. Either way, you have to put a device on a thing, head to the bridge, hear Alex and January argue one last time, and then push a button. And then you get this tiny cutscene that lasts maybe a few seconds. There are a bunch of these too. You see how there's a shuttle that escapes the station before it blows? That's because I did side quests to ensure that surviving personnel could make it off. I could also decide to blow up the station and hitch a ride on that shuttle. All these little cutscenes suck. All that build up, the escalating crisis, and the intrigue just become put a thing on a thing and push a button to get your own personalized 3-second clip. Speaking of the writing, you might recognize one of the writers, Chris Avellone. You may know him from his writing in Knights of the Old Republic 2, FTL, Fallout 2, and Fallout New Vegas. You may also know him from headlines like this. And now, the very last input you get to make as a player. It's an incredibly heavy decision. Be a pal or kill everyone. The fact that the game opens with literally asking you about the trolley problem and then closes with this decision is like fucking poetry. Play your way. I think what happens after you make either decision is hilarious. Here, see for yourself. Now, before wrapping everything up, I want to talk about the small things. First up, other than the exterior, the levels in this game are all pretty small. The game takes place in 14 interconnected zones, and you can more or less freely move between them once you get past the game's intro. I really like how each zone has a clear function aboard Talos 1 instead of just being generic space station rooms. The thing is, though, I don't find any of the levels to be memorable at all. I mean, I do remember certain identifying landmarks. Like, I remember that the Arboretum has trees and that life support has these big fans. But in terms of arenas or level layouts, none of them stood out to me as being particularly fun or memorable to fight in, sneak in, or navigate. Well, actually, I think this part of the power plant is pretty memorable. First, it looks awesome. Second, while going down is a breeze, getting back up is an enormous pain in the ass. Both the lift and the stairway are broken, so you have to do some platforming, and it's not even laid out in a way that's fun or conducive to platforming. On top of that, they spawn in these tanky flying technopaths that shoot at you as you work your way up. Screw this level. I did really like the exterior though. The microgravity movement felt really nice and satisfying, and there was a certain tranquility to it. Typhon do show up in the exterior later on in the game though, and they're not fun to fight at all. Just another nuisance. Despite the small size of the levels, the loading screens are kinda long. Normally, I don't really care about how long a loading screen is, because there isn't usually a whole lot developers can do to shorten them. But the discrepancy between long loading screen and small level didn't feel good. What's worse is that there are inevitably going to be moments where you rapidly move between several zones, and you'll spend more time in loading screens than in game. The loading screens also have a bit of a kick to the teeth attached to them. Whenever I hit a loading screen in a game, I tend to sit back and idle, especially for long loading screens. And then when the loading screen finishes, I perk up and I'm ready to get playing. But Prey hits you with another loading screen every single time. And it's not brief. Why? What good is a post-loading loading screen? What are we loading now that we couldn't load while the screen looked like this? It's a small thing, but small things add up. And this game has lots of small things, like those damn unskippable intros, or the unskippable fabricator animation, or the fact that opening a menu or starting a hack has this awkward delay while you put your transcribe up to your eye. The game world actually freezes while you're doing this, but you can still move around. You can see me here moving into the drone that I'm hacking, making him detect me, though thankfully that didn't interrupt the hack. So yeah, this game doesn't have much respect for your time. It also has small visual problems. I probably care more about these than most people, but I like graphics that look consistent. I don't need them to look realistic or even all that pleasant. I just want consistency. Prey, for the most part, provides that, and with an art style that I think looks good and totally fits thematically. But every once in a while, it does some small things that I hate. At several points, there were details or shadows that pop in and out of existence as I move closer or farther. This sucks. If I was really far away, it would make sense to save performance by not rendering the detail, but the fact that I can see it popping in and out of existence in front of me means that its tuning is way off. And I'm playing on the highest graphic settings. This is as good as it gets. I wouldn't be surprised at all if I can force it to not do this stupid crap the same way that I could force it to not do stupid crap with the crosshair and stupid crap with motion blur, even though all of those settings should be here in the settings menu, and they just aren't. There's also plenty of weird flickering, which I can only assume is occlusion culling error. Occlusion culling is when a game stops rendering, or culls, certain objects or geometry because they're completely hidden from view, which is to say they're occluded. Once again, this is actually a smart technique to save computer performance for the stuff that the player actually sees, but when games get it wrong, it looks horrendous. This clip is basically game graphics kryptonite to me. You might have spotted this in the intro. I'll slow it down for you. The entire world outside of the helicopter disappears for a couple frames. My God. So, what to make of Prey? Every good thing I can say about it carries annoying baggage. The guns feel good to shoot, especially the shotgun. But the enemies are so tanky that combat feels like a chore, and especially towards the end, you're kind of better off just skipping through it. The intrigue and world building start off incredible, but the writers gave up by the final act, and the ending is absolute shit. Worse than worthless. The Typhon are cool on paper, but in practice they were just formless blobs to shoot at or sprint past. I liked the narrative aspect to the levels and how each had a clear purpose on the station, but they weren't actually that interesting as gameplay arenas or as set pieces. So many systems in this game feel tacked on and thoughtless. The stealth system, the skill tree, the Typhon powers, the hacking minigame. And so many things feel like the game is trying its best to make sure you don't have fun, like the annoying route design, the stupid Neuromod DRM quest, and those damn laser boxes. I should point out again, in case it wasn't clear, that this game has no connection whatsoever to the original Prey. Other than the wrench and the fact that you can shoot guns, there is nothing in common. There is no narrative continuity, and the gameplay is structured completely differently. Absolutely none of the stuff that made Prey unique, like the portals or variable gravity, make an appearance at all. Overall, this game kinda played it safe. I didn't see a single thing here that I haven't seen done better somewhere else. Look, it's pretty clear that this game wants to be BioShock. Between the wrench, the half-baked stealth system, the hacking, the superpowers, the RPG-style skills, the horror undertones, the untrustworthy characters, taking pictures of enemies to learn more about them, and the fact that the setting is a big, livable structure in an otherwise unsurvivable and inaccessible location, it's pretty undeniable. BioShock, in my opinion, pulls all that off much better and has fantastic writing to boot. However, I have to say, I think that copying gameplay from other games is actually a fantastic idea. If you like what you see in other games, why not replicate it in your own? You don't even have to put your own spin on it if you don't want to, in my opinion. But this Prey's complete lack of innovation is pretty stark contrast to the original Prey's nearly constant stream of things I've never seen before. Ultimately, it's not like I didn't enjoy Prey. Or more precisely, it's not that I never enjoyed Prey. There was a window of a few hours in the middle that I really liked. The combat was brief and fun. I no longer had to worry about any obstructions in my way, and I didn't feel any extra pressure to get neuromods ASAP. I could really focus on the story and the world building and blasting the baddies. But my first impression with the game was horrible, and if it wasn't for this video, I probably would have just stopped playing before I got to the part that I enjoyed. And then the ending was so terrible, both in terms of the narrative and the gameplay, that it's left a lasting bad taste in my mouth. Well, there we have it, folks. We've seen what each Prey is offering. So, which of them comes out on top? Well, this shouldn't surprise anybody. I have to give the title to the first one. The worst thing I can say about it is that the shooty bangs don't feel especially great, and that the short period of time where you have to kill a bunch of keepers was a slog. This one is Prey. Also, its intro bathroom is simply better. Gotta say, this is pretty underwhelming. Prey made the sink actually fill up and drain out. The water was represented by a 3D mesh that actually rose and fell. In the Prey Tinder, it's just a 2D texture that shrinks into the drain, and the same texture is just duplicated over and over again. They don't even bother to give the texture a random rotation each time. I guess this is better than nothing, but not by much. The toilet's a similar story, except that it doesn't even look good. And I can't even smack the toilet seat up and down. And the mirror doesn't work at all. I'm not even sure what the blurry reflection is supposed to be. It doesn't match the bathroom whatsoever. So yeah, there's just no contest. So what should this game be called? Well, let's start with the obvious. How about Prey 2? I mean, Far Cry 1 is a linear shooter, but then Far Cry 2 was developed by a different studio, and it became an open world game, setting the mold for all subsequent Far Cry games. And there's absolutely no narrative continuity between any of them. So calling this game Prey 2 wouldn't be without precedent. But yeah, given how this game completely abandoned every element of Prey other than the wrench, I don't think calling it Prey at all makes any sense. I already mentioned that this game is very similar to BioShock. Well, BioShock was developed as a spiritual successor to System Shock, hence the name. And though I referred to it earlier, I haven't actually played through System Shock. But it's pretty clear to me that Prey is influenced by both of these games, so why not name it something Shock? Like I mentioned, one of the abilities in Prey is called Psychoshock. That's a great name for this game. It harkens back to its influences, and it fits nicely with the game's emphasis on the mind, what with the neuromods, the psychoscope, psyhypos, and so on. Oh look, someone else already had the same idea. So yeah, Psychoshock it is. Okay, that's it. Tune in next time for laser guns, laser swords, and laser masters. I wonder why the alien keypads only have 8 numbers on them. Wait a second.